Picture this. A lab tech is staring at a slide under the microscope. The sample came from a patient coughing up blood. Classic TB symptoms. And yet, the slide is completely blank. Nothing there. The bacteria pulled off a perfect disappearing act. If that just confused you, good. Because by the end of this episode, not only will you understand exactly how Mycobacterium tuberculosis hides from your eyes and your immune system, you'll be able to answer any ASCP question they throw at you about this organism. Let's get into it. A 74-year-old man walks into a clinic in Texas showing some pretty terrifying classic symptoms. Significant unexplained weight loss. Waking up in the middle of the night completely drenched in sweat. And most alarming of all, he is coughing up blood. For any clinician, those symptoms immediately trigger a massive red alert. You're basically looking at a severe respiratory infection, likely something deeply entrenched in the lung. So they run the standard diagnostic playbook. They take samples of his sputum, the mucus he's coughing up, smear it directly onto a slide, and look under the microscope. They're hunting for the culprit. And the slide is totally clear. Nothing. It looks like a dead end. But then, weeks later, after letting those same supposedly empty samples sit and incubate in a lab culture, the true villain finally reveals itself. Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Now here's what's striking about that case. It highlights the sheer evasiveness of this bacteria. And this isn't just some historical curiosity from a Charles Dickens novel. Tuberculosis remains the leading cause of death globally from a single infectious agent. It actually surpasses HIV in that regard. We're talking millions of new cases every single year. And the genus it belongs to, Mycobacterium, includes over 150 different species, hiding everywhere, from your tap water to the decorative aquarium in your living room. So, how does the deadliest infectious agent on Earth manage to look completely invisible on that initial test? To answer that, we have to look at the physical armor these bacteria wear. In standard microbiology, when a lab wants to visualize bacteria, they use basic room temperature dyes to stain the cell wall, just to make the bacteria pop with color under a microscope. But if you try that with a mycobacterium, the dye just washes right off. The slide stays completely blank, which is exactly what happened to our patient in Texas. So what is this cell wall actually made of? Their cell walls are packed with an incredibly high concentration of lipids, specifically, a waxy fat called mycolic acid. They're essentially encased in a dense, hydrophobic layer of wax. Microscopic raincoats. So how does a lab ever actually see them? You have to get aggressive. Lab technicians force a specialized dye into the cell wall using heat, or extended time, basically melting the dye into the wax. And once that dye is trapped inside, they wash the slide with a harsh mix of acid and alcohol. Normal bacteria, they lose their color instantly. But the Mycobacterium, they hold fast against the acid, which gives them their famous medical nickname, acid-fast bacilli, AFB. And that's not just a fun fact, that is a guaranteed ASCP exam concept. The two main staining methods you need to know. Ziehl-Neelsen uses heat with carbofucsin. More consistent results, quinine, cold stain. Same principle, no heat needed, and for higher sensitivity, the auramine rhodamine fluorochrome stain, which can actually pick up about 18% more positive specimens than the traditional methods. Now, that waxy armor isn't just designed to frustrate lab technicians. It dictates exactly how these bacteria invade our bodies. When someone with active TB coughs, or even just speaks, they expel microscopic airborne droplets containing those waxy bacilli. You breathe them in. They travel deep into the tiniest air sacs of your lungs, the alveoli. And that's where your body's first responders show up, macrophages. Macrophages are the apex predators of your cellular immune system. Massive phagocytic cells whose entire purpose is to engulf and digest foreign invaders. Under normal circumstances, a macrophage eats a bacteria, traps it in a little internal compartment called a phagosome, then merges that with a lysosome, basically a biological sac of acid and digestive enzymes. The cellular stomach. It dissolves the invading bacteria into harmless proteins. Think of it like a cellular garbage truck picking up a piece of trash and turning on the incinerator. But when the macrophage eats Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the trash puts up a force field. The bacteria physically block the lysosome from fusing with the phagosome. They literally hijack the garbage truck, and safely multiply inside the very immune cells that were sent to destroy them. And this isn't just a passive defense. That waxy lipid armor is part of an active, highly sophisticated subversion of the macrophage's internal machinery. They turn your body's primary defense mechanism into a luxury hotel for intracellular multiplication. But the body doesn't just give up. It calls in the cavalry, T cells. These T cells surround the infected area and release a flood of chemical alarm signals, specifically interferon gamma, IFN gamma. This signal screams at the hijacked macrophages to fight harder. But often, the bacteria's armor is just too thick. The force field holds, so the immune system pivots to containment. It builds a prison, a complex structure called a granuloma, a spherical wall of densely packed white blood cells, literally locking the infected macrophages in the center. A cellular concrete sarcophagus. The body quarantines the infection within its own tissue. And inside that sarcophagus, things get incredibly destructive. Here's the part that surprises most people: the lung tissue destruction we see in TB, that isn't caused by bacteria eating the lung. It's collateral damage from the immune system bombing its own infrastructure to starve the bacteria. The macrophages at the center of the granuloma die and disintegrate. What's left behind is called caseous necrosis, from the Latin word for cheese, because it leaves this dense, semi-solid, granular dead tissue. The bacteria, now trapped in this hostile low-oxygen wasteland, do the only thing they can. They go to sleep. They enter a dormant latent state. And they wait. Now, if millions of people walking around right now have these cellular prisons in their lungs holding dormant bacteria, why don't we just proactively treat everyone with antibiotics? Here's why that doesn't work. Almost all antibiotics are designed to target bacteria that are actively metabolizing and dividing. They target the machinery of growth. And dormant bacteria aren't growing. Their machinery is completely turned off. They're in biological suspended animation, hidden behind layers of waxy lipids and walled off inside dense dead human tissue. Even if the drugs could get through, killing a bacteria that isn't doing anything requires an immense, punishing drug burden. We'd be putting millions of healthy-feeling people on highly toxic medications for up to 9 months. Severe side effects, impossible logistics, and most critically, people stop taking the drugs early. The bacteria don't always stay asleep. If the patient gets older, or another illness weakens their immune system, the granuloma breaks down. The bacteria wake up, multiply, and break out. This is reactivation TB, and they don't always stay in the lungs. If they spill into the bloodstream, they hitchhike to entirely different parts of the body: the spleen, the liver, the kidneys, the meninges around the brain. This is called miliary TB, named after the tiny millet seed-sized lesions that erupt all over the organs. And it gets worse. They can seed into the bones. Pot disease, skeletal TB of the spine, where the bacteria erode the vertebrae until the spine literally collapses. Now, here's where drug resistance enters. Standard TB treatment requires a heavy cocktail of multiple drugs taken every single day for at least 6 months. Phase 1, intensive, 8 weeks isoniazid plus rifampin plus pyrazinamide plus ethambutol. Phase 2, continuation, 18 weeks isoniazid plus rifampin. Because the bacteria grow so slowly, you have to keep blood saturated with medication, just waiting for the sleeping bacteria to slowly wake up and divide so you can kill them. Now imagine being the patient. 2 months in, your cough stops, your fever breaks. You feel completely cured. The temptation to throw away the pill bottles is overwhelming. But if you stop at month 3, the few remaining slow growers inside the granuloma survive. They've been exposed to the drugs. They adapt. They mutate. You've just created MDR-TB, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. Strains that brush off our most potent first-line drugs. And the nightmare scenario, XDR-TB, extensively drug-resistant TB, immune to almost our entire pharmaceutical arsenal. Curing it requires years of brutal treatment with severe side effects and often daily injections. So, let's talk about actually finding this bacteria. Because as we saw, the standard slide test often misses it entirely. For decades, the gold standard was the PPD skin test, the tuberculin skin test. You inject a tiny amount of purified protein derivative just under the skin of the forearm. 48 hours later, if there's a raised, firm induration of 10 mm or more in immunocompetent individuals, it's considered reactive. But the PPD has serious limitations. It's subjective. It generates false positives. Most critically, if someone received the BCG vaccine, their immune system will react to the PPD even if they've never had TB infection. The vaccine cross-reactivity makes it nearly useless in many populations. This is why the diagnostic world developed a massive upgrade, the IGRA, interferon gamma release assay. 2 commercially available tests. QuantiFERON TB Gold plus TSpot.TB. Instead of injecting proteins and guessing based on a skin reaction, they draw your blood. They expose your white blood cells to highly specific synthetic proteins that only exist in Mycobacterium tuberculosis, ESAT6 and CFP10, proteins that are not found in the BCG vaccine. Then instead of measuring a bump, the lab measures the exact amount of interferon gamma your blood cells release. Objective, precise, unaffected by BCG vaccination. Results in about 24 hours. Key limitation to remember for your exam: like the PPD, the IGRA cannot distinguish between active and latent infection. Even after diagnosis, to actually treat the disease, you need to grow the bacteria in culture to determine which drugs will work. And here is the fundamental bottleneck. Mycobacterium tuberculosis divides incredibly slowly, with a replication time of 20 to 22 hours. On solid media, it can take 2 to 6 weeks just to grow a visible colony. You have a patient coughing up blood in the ER. The lab tells the doctor to check back in a month. The culture media you need to know. Egg-based, Lowenstein-Jensen, LJ, most commonly used. Produces buff-colored, rough, corded colonies. Agar-based, Middlebrook 7H10 and 7H11, chemically defined, allows earlier detection under dissecting microscope. Middlebrook 7H11 specifically contains 0.1% casein hydrolysate, improves recovery of isoniazid-resistant strains, liquid media, MGIT system, fastest, continuous monitoring, detects growth in days rather than weeks. For colony appearance, tuberculosis produces rough, buff-colored, non-pigmented colonies, sometimes showing the classic cord formation pattern. Because waiting 6 weeks for culture results is literally a death sentence for drug-resistant cases, the field of clinical mycobacteriology is undergoing a technological revolution. We're bypassing the need to grow bacteria entirely. Nucleic acid amplification tests, NOTs extract DNA directly from the patient's sputum, amplify it millions of times, and look for the specific genetic mutations that cause drug resistance. The Cepheid expert MTB/RIF can detect tuberculosis and rifampin resistance mutations in the ARPB gene, in hours. MALDI-TOF mass spectrometry, hit the bacterial sample with a laser to ionize its proteins, then measure how fast those proteins fly through a vacuum tube. The weight of the proteins creates a unique fingerprint, identifying the species in minutes instead of months. We are literally throwing DNA amplification and lasers at this organism just to counter its evolutionary strategy of extreme slowness. As we've deployed these advanced diagnostics to hunt for TB, we've accidentally mapped out an entire family tree of what are called nontuberculous mycobacteria, NTM. Over 180 species recognized, and some of them behave in ways that completely defy standard understanding of bacteria. Classification by pigment production, the key you need for your exam. Photochromogens, produce pigment only when exposed to light. Classic example, M. kansasi and M. marinum. Take M. marinum. It lives in inadequately chlorinated freshwater and fish tanks. A small cut on your hand while cleaning your aquarium, it gets in, causing what doctors call a swimming pool granuloma. In the lab, streak it onto a plate, leave it in a dark incubator, colonies grow completely pale. The moment you expose that plate to fluorescent light, the bacteria synthesize beta-carotene crystals, and within hours those pale colonies turn a brilliant deep yellow. Biological invisible ink. Scotochromogens, produce pigment in both light and dark. Classic example, M. scrofulaceae, the former leading cause of cervical lymphadenitis in children before MAC took over. Non-chromogens, no pigment production regardless of light. This includes M. tuberculosis itself, and the critically important MAC, Mycobacterium avium complex, the most common systemic bacterial infection in AIDS patients. And then there is the most extreme member of this family, Mycobacterium leprae, the causative agent of Hansen's disease. Here's what makes it biologically remarkable. You cannot grow it on any artificial medium, no matter what nutrients you put in it. M. leprae has undergone reductive evolution. Over thousands of years it literally threw away the genes it would need to survive independently. To study it, scientists historically had to infect 9-banded armadillos, because their naturally low body temperature perfectly suits the bacteria's optimal growth temperature of approximately 30 degrees Celsius. The disease exists on a spectrum. Tuberculoid leprosy, strong CMI response, localized nerve damage and skin patches, milder form lepromatous leprosy, failed CMI response, bacteria multiply unchecked, severe progressive skin lesions and facial deformity borderline, intermediate severity, most common form. Laboratory diagnosis relies on microscopic demonstration of AFB from skin biopsy specimens, using a weaker decolorizer of 10% sulfuric acid instead of standard acid ethanol. Over the course of this episode, we've explored how a single family of bacteria, wrapped in an incredibly stubborn waxy layer of mycolic acid, manages to cause everything from ancient bone-crushing plagues to modern aquarium skin ulcers. We've seen how they evolved to literally hijack the microscopic garbage trucks of our immune system, turning our own cellular defenses into a safe haven. And we've seen how their weapon of extreme agonizing slowness forces modern medicine to deploy DNA amplification and mass spectrometry lasers just to figure out what drugs might actually kill them. Here's something to chew on. We spend billions trying to develop hyperfast diagnostics and aggressive rapid-fire drugs to outpace these slow-growing bacteria. But these organisms have thrived for millennia precisely because their slow metabolism and dormant states allow them to evade destruction. By aggressively targeting them with hyperfast interventions, might we actually be forcing them to evolve, inadvertently pushing them toward even stealthier, more deeply latent forms of disease? Something to think about the next time you marvel at the speed of modern medical technology. And that's a wrap on the Mycobacterium chapter. but your ASCP prep journey is just getting started. If this episode helped you finally visualize how TB works instead of just memorizing it, hit subscribe right now, because every single episode on this channel is built the exact same way. Real cases, deep understanding, exam ready. Drop a comment below with one word, acid fast, and I'll know you made it to the end. That tells me you're serious about this exam, and I'll make sure to prioritize the topics you need most. Share this with your study group, because the ASCP is hard enough. You don't have to figure it out alone. This is ASCP Prep Camp, and we don't just study, we understand. See you in the next one.